Turkey and Iran will agree on the particular borders of those zones throughout May. But here's what we know so far. The first zone will include the whole of Idlib province and certain parts of neighboring provinces as well. That's where a mosque was hit by a reported U.S.-led coalition airstrike back in March. The second will cover parts in the north of Homs province. Then another will encompass parts of the Daraa and Quneitra province in the south of the country. And finally, one more will be established in some areas of eastern Ghouta, just outside of the capital, Damascus. All the areas consist of both government and rebel-controlled parts of the country. And to discuss this further, we have with us veteran journalist and Middle East expert Martin Jay. Hi there, sir. Thank you for joining us here on RT International. So how do you think Washington's view will be regarding the establishment of the zones, particularly now that they've announced that the no-fly zones will also apply to the U.S.-led coalition forces?
Well, peace comes at a price, doesn't it? And I think that there's been a great deal of euphoria today on the Russian side, on this part of the Atlantic. But over in Washington, I think there's going to be a certain amount of despondency and guarded comments so far. I mean, they're certainly not going to be celebrating anything. It's hard to imagine how something like this, which has been presented as a breakthrough, a peace deal, call it what you will, can be perceived by the Americans, by Trump, as some sort of diplomatic victory for him. It's as though all of the major players have got around the table and looked at a map of Syria and discussed amongst themselves what is the weakest link, where can we actually extract some compromises which could be a patched together peace process, and they've all come up with the FSA, which of course is American-backed. The FSA are on the American payroll. So I think we need to look at this more calmly and be more measured. And I think critically, the key thing with the Americans will be in 2 weeks' time when President Erdogan of Turkey, who has positioned himself brilliantly as a peace broker and negotiator with East and West, he will speak, he will meet Trump on, I think, the 15th or the 16th, and I have a suspicion that he will pull the rabbit out of the hat and present a master plan of some sort of compromise where Americans can look as though they've gained something from this deal.
Well, now, going back to those safe zones, do you think the guarantor states, that's Russia, Iran, and Turkey, they'll be able to provide such safety both on the ground and in the air?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, we don't know that, and we just don't even know what the details of how they will be implemented. I mean, if we're talking about the memorandum mentioned foreign soldiers, does that mean Iranian guards along those borders, protecting them from any acts of insurgency or from either side of those warring factions? We just don't know. I mean, I think the bigger question, and the worrying question, which is really going to be on the top of the agenda in Washington, is can Russia really be expected to implement a no-fly zone of its own ally in the region, the Assad regime? And let's not forget, the Assad regime did not officially back this deal. It's an unofficial, nod and a wink at the last moment. We've heard from various reports that they've gone along with it, just as America has gone along with it to a fashion. But that will be the big question. Can the Russians actually implement a no-fly zone of Assad forces?
Now, we know that some of the opposition members, during the signing of the memorandum to agree to these safe zones, they walked out, and they were against the division of Syria. Why do you think they're suddenly worried about that?
Well, the FSA, I mean, have lost a lot of ground in the last year or so. I mean, they lost Aleppo, and they're very bitter about that. And their accusation they hurl at the Russians was that Mr. Erdogan of Turkey brokered a deal in December of last year with Mr. Putin that how Aleppo would fall and who gets what wouldn't be quite so dramatic as the total victory of the Assad regime that we saw. So there's a lack of trust there, and that's the real problem. But I think the histrionics we saw at the meeting of them walking out, I believe, and I've been told this by some of my sources, that they were told to do this by the Americans. This was an orchestrated, theatrical event, and I think we need to read into that that the Americans aren't happy with the deal at all, because it doesn't really represent, as I said earlier, any sort of victory for them. The idea that the FSA, under these terms of this deal, are going to give up their arms is laughable, and we shouldn't take it seriously, but that's just not going to happen.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. That was a veteran journalist and Middle East expert, Martin Jay. Thank you.